Faces of Death 2026 takes the most notorious "is it real" horror tape of the VHS era and asks a much nastier question. What happens when the same obsession with death runs on algorithm power and the victims are picked for views? In this video, we are breaking down the full story of Faces of Death, unpacking that brutal final act, and talking about what the movie is really saying about online gore, content moderation, and us, the people who watch it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. We cover sci-fi, horror, action-adventure, prop culture, and all things geek. So if you're into horror breakdowns, ending explainers, and deep dives into the weirdest new releases, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss the next one, and let's get into Faces of Death. Full ending explained and analysis. So from here on out, spoilers beware. I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind. All right, let's dive into the story from Margot's first day on the job to the blood-soaked final showdown. So before the killer ever shows up, Faces of Death makes it clear that Margot is already living in a horror story. Years earlier, Margot and her sister were filming a clout-chasing stunt on train tracks, hoping to go viral with a Kino-style video. Margot kept the camera rolling when her sister slipped, got stuck, and was hit by an oncoming train. A moment the movie keeps replaying in fragments, always cutting away, right before impact. The footage went to the police as evidence, but someone on the force leaked it online and it spread everywhere. Margot became the train girl, a meme built out of her worst memory. So when we meet her in the present, her old friend Josh has brought her into Kino, a content moderator company, pitching it as a way for her to take some control back, because she knows exactly how it feels to have your trauma turned into entertainment. He assumes she'll treat the job like a mission, protecting other people from becoming the next viral shock clip. In practice, it means sitting in a gray cubicle all day, scrolling through a queue of user-flagged videos and tagging crashes, assaults, animal attacks, and rough pranks, with drop-down labels before moving on to the next nightmare. Margot isn't just another body in the chairs either. She's senior enough that we see her training new moderators, giving them Kino's sanitized spiel about community guidelines and mental health. She wants them not to talk in detail about what they see and, crucially, not to follow up on any of it. No digging into missing person cases, no playing detective after hours, because that way lies obsession and burnout. Those are the exact lines she'll end up crossing once the wrong kind of video hits her queue. Buried in that endless feed, a pattern starts to form. Margot notices a run of unusually polished death videos. Electric chair executions, staged bludgeonings among mannequins, even a monkey mutilation set piece that feels ripped out of another era. The clips don't all show up under one neat channel label. As far as the interface is concerned, they're just more scattered uploads in her moderation pipeline. But the style is too cohesive to ignore. Same cold narration, same framing, same mix of theatrical staging and unnerving realism. So she goes to Josh and tells him she thinks all these deaths are coming from the same person. Josh wants none of it. He's the one who vouched for her after the train girl incident, and he's terrified she's about to become a problem again. When she suggests these could be real murders and maybe they should talk to the police, he shuts her down, reminding her that bringing in law enforcement is bad for Kino's image and opens them up to liability. Instead, he reframes it as good for business. DIY horror is trending, he says, and as long as the videos are probably fake, they're exactly the kind of edgy content that keeps users engaged. He also reminds her about the NDA. She can't just leak things or escalate outside the company without risking her job. On the surface, that conversation tells Margot to treat these clips like harmless special effects gore and let them stay on the platform. Underneath, it confirms her worst fear. If the deaths are real, the system she works for could rather keep them up as content than admit something is wrong. That's the moment she stops living by the rules she's been teaching new hires and starts breaking them, convinced that the only way to find the truth about this account is to go outside the company that's profiting from it. After that conversation with Josh, Margot does what she explicitly told not to do. She keeps thinking about the videos once she clocks out. The more she replays them in her head, the less they feel edgy DIY whore, and the more they feel like execution someone has gone out of their way to disguise as content. She starts quietly breaking company rules. Margot posts anonymously online about what she keeps seeing, hinting that there's a series of videos on Kino that might be real murders, even though she signed an NDA that forbids that. She takes mental notes about props and backgrounds and cross-checks those details against missing person sites and local news, looking for any overlap between the people in her queue and the people who have vanished. Eventually, she becomes convinced that at least one of the men in the clips matches a missing person case, even if she can't prove it in a way that will satisfy her bosses or the police. At the same time, the killer's production values escalate. What started as 3 execution videos, an electrocution, a beheading, a brutal bludgeoning, expands into full slate of kills, elaborate set pieces with mannequins, carefully framed close-ups, and a monotonous narrator who sounds more like a bored host than a raving maniac. From Margot's perspective, it all feels like one continuous project, one auteur behind the camera, even if the platform UI doesn't tie it to all a single username. Kino, meanwhile, treats it as a trend. Inside the office, the line is DIY whore is hot right now, and as long as viewers can tell themselves it's fake, the appetite for this kind of clip is good for engagement. To Josh and the higher-ups, the gray area is a feature, not a bug. If the violence sits right on the border where you can't be sure if it's real, people watch longer, share more, and argue in the comments. For Margot, that ambiguity is exactly what makes it feel snuff. If they're real, then she's watching genuine killings roll through a queue that mostly treats them like any other upload. Either way, her job has shifted from protecting people to rubber stamping a series she increasingly believes is documenting a serial killer. And that realization is what pushes her from burnt-out moderator into full-on investigator. Once the movie starts cutting to Arthur Spevak, it makes one thing very clear. This isn't a whodunit. It's a why we are watching this story. Arthur is the man behind the camera, and he thinks like a creator, not a classic slasher villain. He plans each killing as an episode in his own unauthorized remake of Faces of Death. Same kind of setup, same pseudo-documentary tone, but updated with better cameras, cleaner sound, and a deep understanding of what plays in a vertical video world. He talks openly about the audience, about giving people what they want, about how the original movie became a cult object precisely because no one could decide how much of it was real. For Arthur, the line between homage and escalation is simple. He wants it to go further. If the 1978 film became infamous by blurring reality, he wants his version to be undeniable, real executions disguised just enough as content that platforms will host them and viewers will click out of morbid curiosity. Every choice he makes, from staging and lighting to how much he shows of the bodies, is calibrated for views. Something shocking enough to keep you watching, but just ambiguous enough that Kino can pretend it's fake. We've seen some of Arthur's work as his finished product, a slickly produced viral video. However, as the film progresses, we follow Arthur as he attacks and captures several of his victims. Arthur's most chilling episode is the one built around Neal, a local news anchor and his young son. It's where the movie shows step by step how he scripts real people into his remake of Faces of Death. Arthur first targets Neal online, then follows him in the real world. We see Neal with his son at the supermarket. Arthur tails them home, watching from a distance and learning their routine. Later that day, when father and son are in the driveway, Arthur pulls up in his Oldsmobile and just sits there for a moment, preparing himself. Then he pulls out a knife, calmly slices his own palm, and gets out of the car, calling for help. Neal does exactly what Arthur is counting on. He acts like a decent person. He brings Arthur into the house to help bandage his hand. while his son hovers nearby asking about video game time, creating just enough background noise to keep Neal distracted. As Neal rummages for first aid supplies with his back turned, Arthur quietly lifts the house keys from the counter, a tiny, small, invisible theft that is the whole point of this performance. Once he has the keys, he thanks Neal, leaves, and disappears, having successfully located, scouted the house, and secured a way back in. Later that night, Arthur returns. This time he doesn't need a ruse. He cuts the power to the home, using the stolen keys to slip inside without breaking anything or triggering suspicion. He hides and waits. At one point, the film even plays it as a grotesque peekaboo scare, with Arthur emerging from a hiding place in the attic in the laundry room. Once Neal is alone and vulnerable, when he strikes, he attacks Neal with fentanyl, using the same drug we've seen him use on other victims, and tries to overpower him. Neal fights back, but Arthur is relentless. The struggle ends with Neal subdued and his son, who comes looking for his dad in the dark house, also ambushed and taken. The next time we see them, they're no longer in the home. They're in Arthur's kill space. Father and son are caged like the other captives, reduced to raw material for his remake. Neal is eventually taken out of the cage and marched into a room where he is put up against a door that Arthur has set up for his recreation of the original film's firing squad execution. A line of mannequins posed as soldiers, guns pointed at a single helpless man. Neal's hands are tied in front of him. Arthur gives him a gun and a single bullet and forces him to load it while the cameras roll, turning even his clumsy, terrified attempt to work the weapon into part of the show. The whole thing is staged to echo the official execution imagery from the 1978 Faces of Death, while making it crueler. Here we know it's a real dad, a real fear, and a real death. When Neal fumbles and fails, Arthur has him shot multiple times on camera, not by a real squad, but through the machinery he's set up to simulate one. And the film cuts away, leaving us with the knowledge that this is just one more clip queued up for Margot's feed. This whole arc, the fake injury, the stolen keys, the power cut, the attic ambush, the firing squad recreation, is Arthur's process in miniature. Manipulate, record, execute, then package the result as content for an audience that's hungry to see how far he'll go. That hunger for fame is his whole engine. Arthur doesn't just want to kill people, he wants to be remembered as the guy who remade Faces of Death for the social media age, the one who turned viral snuff into an art project and forced millions of people to confront the fact that they kept watching. He talks about virility and legacy like other characters talk about morality, and he treats his victims, including Samantha and Neal's son, as props in a gallery he's building, not as human beings whose deaths might end his career or his life. So by the time we reach the ending, that obsession with being seen and being remembered is exactly what Margot exploits. Arthur is so focused on completing his series, controlling every angle, and preserving the footage that he underestimates her and walks straight into the kind of finale he never planned. One where he still dies on camera, but not as the legend he thought he was crafting. As Margot digs deeper, she tries to go through the proper routes. She pushes her boss at Kino to escalate the videos. She tries to get the police to pay attention. After an attack where she's injected with fentanyl and barely survives, she gets treated like a possible addict, not a victim. Over and over, the movie shows institutions treating her as a problem, not the killings. Kino is terrified of bad PR and lawsuits, not of the idea that someone might be broadcasting real murders on their platform. Their goal is to stay technically compliant with their own guidelines and legally insulated, not to save anyone's life. So Margot ends up alone, stuck between a killer making content for clicks and a company that only cares if this becomes a public scandal. As Margot keeps digging, she stops being just a burnt-out moderator and starts becoming a liability, both to Kino and to Arthur. On the work side, she blows past every boundary she used to teach new hires. She leaks details outside the company, keeps following up on cases after hours, and openly argues with her boss about whether DIY whore videos might actually be documenting real murders. Eventually, Kino cuts her loose. She's fired, not for being wrong about the danger, but for refusing to treat it like just another content trend. Getting canned doesn't calm her down. It just means she has nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, Arthur has been watching the Watchers. He traces Margot's moderator account through the platform's infrastructure and starts tracking her movements, figuring out who she is outside the cubicle. That's how he finds her apartment and her roommate, the one person who can see firsthand how badly this job and this investigation are shredding her. The roommate is nervous from the start, worried that Margot is bringing something dangerous home with her, but he's still in the classic horror movie voice of reason lane, urging her to let it go, to stop poking at this, to walk away before it gets worse. Arthur doesn't give her that option. He shows up at their place and the movie stages one of the nastiest turns, a home invasion that proves Margot's fears weren't paranoia. Arthur attacks in the supposedly safe space, turning the apartment into another crime scene. The roommate, who was never more than a bystander in all of this, ends up as collateral damage. Killed off screen, but disposed on screen in a way that underscores how little Arthur cares about anyone who isn't part of his series. Margot herself is abducted, drugged, and hauled off to his kill studio, waking up in a cage like people she's been watching on her screen. Inside that plastic draped garage, Arthur has built his own version of a content farm. Cages, restraints, drop cloths, cameras, and lighting rigs all set up so he can churn out episode after episode. Margot isn't empty-handed though. She's still carrying a lipstick knife we saw her roommate give her earlier, a tiny, easily overlooked blade that becomes her one advantage. Using that hidden weapon, she manages to work at the restraints and escape her cage, proving she's absorbed more from those endless violent clips than just numb horror. She's been learning where people make mistakes. Her first move isn't to run, it's to help someone else. She frees another captive, Stephanie, and pushes her to get out while she can. Stephanie bolts, sprinting across the property, and for a second it looks like she might make it. Then the movie snaps that hope in half. Sniper-style shots cut her down, bullets dropping her mid-escape. It's quick, ruthless, and filmed like just another beat in Arthur's storyboard, rather than a tragedy, which is exactly how he sees it. Stephanie doesn't die just yet. That comes later. By the time this whole sequence is over, Margot has lost her job, her home, and the last person in her life who was trying to pull her back from the edge. She's trapped in Arthur's studio, surrounded by plastic sheeting and bodies, with nothing between her and becoming the next episode except one small knife and her ability to outthink a man who has been planning this show for a very long time. It's the perfect launchpad into the final confrontation, where all those threads, the Narcan, the body cam, Arthur's obsession with being seen, finally collide. In the final stretch, Margot thinks she's going back to Arthur's house to save two people, Samantha and the young son of Neal. Neal was a prior victim, and Neal is just collateral damage. Those are the last captives Arthur is holding, and they're the ones Margot is risking everything to rescue. On the taxi ride over, yes, specifically a cab, not a rideshare, Margot quietly doses herself with Narcan, the same overdose reversal spray she was given after she survived Arthur's earlier fentanyl attack. The movie has already told us Narcan isn't meant to be used this way, but Margot has decided she's not going to let him weaponize fentanyl against her again. So she preloads her system as a desperate, last-ditch defense. When she reaches Arthur's house and makes it into the plastic-draped garage, it's too late. Neal's son is already dead, his throat has been slashed, and Arthur has hung his body up as a part of a grotesque display in the clear sheeting, like a piece of set dressing in a snuff art installation. Samantha has been murdered as well and arranged the same way. Their bodies turned into props in Arthur's final episode rather than people he ever intended to let go. Arthur, driven entirely by his desire to be immortal through his footage, forces Margot at gunpoint into another performance. He wants her to inject herself with fentanyl on camera to complete his recreation of faces of death with one last shocking kill that he believes will lock in his legacy forever. What he doesn't realize is that Margot has already used the Narcan in the taxi, anticipating exactly this move. It doesn't make what happens painless or safe, but it robs him of the clean, controllable overdose he had scripted in his head. So from here, the scene devolves into a savage, clumsy fight Margot uses the concealed lipstick knife, the environment, and pure desperation to turn the tables on him, stabbing and struggling with Arthur in a way that feels ugly and exhausting rather than slick or heroic. All the while, she has her own body cam running, capturing Arthur's ranting about remakes, virility, and being remembered, along with his final failure as he loses control of the narrative. In the end, Arthur's obsession with fame is exactly what destroys him. He is so focused on crafting the perfect final display, the bodies of Neal's son and Samantha hanging in his plastic-covered garage, the overdose he wants to film, the masterpiece that will make him infamous, that he underestimates Margot's willingness to break the rules just to survive. She walks out alive with the footage and proof, while he dies in the same kind of spectacle he spent the whole movie trying to control. However, we got to wonder how Margot is going to survive, because it looks like she's crawled into the depths of insanity herself. So what is Faces of Death actually saying with this ending? First, the obvious one, complicity. Arthur is the one holding the knife, but he exists because there's an audience that wants to see him use it. He designs his murders for that audience, short, shocking, replayable. The movie turns the camera back on us and basically asks, if you seek out this kind of content, are you really that different from the people who made the original tape famous? Second, there's a shot at corporate platforms. Kino is as much a villain as Arthur. The company is structured to prioritize metrics, liability, and PR over human lives. Margot's suffering as a moderator doesn't matter. The possible real deaths don't matter. What matter is, can this stay up? Will it cause trouble? The ending underlines that even when you remove one killer, the system that enabled him is still standing. Third, Margot's personal arc. At the start, she's a passive observer, numbly checking boxes while horrific content flows past her eyes. She tells herself that being a gatekeeper is enough. By the end, she's forced to cross that line from watching to acting. She becomes a participant, first as a victim, then as someone who fights back and tries to expose what's really going on. I think she actually does kind of lose it at the very end. The look on her face was appalling. That shift is the heart of the ending. It says there's a moral difference between pressing play and actually intervening, and doing nothing is still a choice. Finally, the discomfort of the ending is the point. The movie doesn't want the last act to feel cool or cathartic. It wants you to feel gross, exhausted, and maybe a little ashamed of how eagerly you signed up to watch something called Faces of Death in 2026. Stopping Arthur doesn't erase the fact that there's an entire ecosystem ready to produce the next version of him, as long as someone is watching. So to be clear, I didn't watch Faces of Death in 1978. I was watching Battlestar Galactica, Happy Days, and reading Dune. I was a kid. But a few years later, my dad did let me watch it when it came out on VHS. Did he watch it with me? Hell no. I wasn't traumatized. My only question was, is this real? So let's put this side by side, because the title, Faces of Death, carries a very specific legacy. The original Faces of Death was built from one thing, shock. It presented itself like a documentary, mixing real footage with staged scenes. And the whole point was to make you question what you were seeing. Is it real or fake? It didn't matter, the reaction did. It was controversial, banned in multiple countries, and passed around like something you weren't supposed to watch. That's why it stuck. It felt dangerous. Now jump to Faces of Death. This version doesn't try to trick you in the same way. Instead, it assumes you already live in a world where real violence is easy to find. So it shifts the focus to the person watching it, a content moderator sorting through graphic videos every day. That's the key difference. In 1978, they ask, can we shock you? This 2026 version asks, what does it do to you when you're already numb? I think the critics specifically and the audience in general actually respect that shift. I saw that one review calls the new version a smart evolution of the original concept for the digital age. But here's where the comparison turns. The original goes all in. Whether you think it's tasteless or effective, it commits to its identity. It wants a reaction, and it gets one. The 2026 version pulls back. Critics say it wants to critique exploitation without embracing the discomfort that made the original infamous, and that's probably where the gap is. The new film is more thoughtful, but less impactful. Even the tone is different. The 1978 film is cold, clinical, almost detached. The 2026 version is more psychological, more character-driven, trying to explore trauma and desensitization. But because it avoids going too far, it loses the edge that made the original stick in people's minds. So here's the clean takeaway. The 1978 film is about shock and taboo. The 2026 film is about reflection and consequence. One hits you, the other studies you. And depending on what you want from a movie called Faces of Death, that difference is either the whole point or the whole problem. Now, this movie is directed by David Goldhaber, who previously made Cam and How to Blow Up a Pipeline. That same mix of genre thrills and social commentary is here again, only now it's aimed at internet culture, moderation jobs, and our obsession with watching shocking videos. The film stars Barbie Ferreira as Margot Romero, our lead content moderator, and of course our protagonist. Dacre Montgomery as Arthur Spevak. He has a special role in this. Josie Tota as Samantha Gravinsky, and Jermaine Fowler as Josh, and Charlie XCX as Gabby. I know critics are split right down the middle on this. Rotten Tomatoes is still in the rotten range with a score of approximately 45 to 55%. Those critics are split, but the majority are leaning negative. On Metacritic, it's more of a 50-55 mixed average split. It fits right in that interesting but flawed zone. On the positive side, there's real respect for the idea. One review calls it a sharp update that understands how modern audiences consume violence. Another says it's more thoughtful than its reputation suggests, anchored by a strong lead performance, and I agree totally. And that's where a lot of the praise lands. Barbie Ferreira carries the film. When it focuses on her and the psychological toll of what she's watching, the film works. Audience reactions are a bit more positive. Horror fans seem to appreciate the concept and restraint, even if it's not what the title promises. Faces of Death 2026 is an interesting swing. It's smarter than you expect, but not as intense as it needs to be. Strong leads, solid premise, uneven tone, and execution. And I want to be transparent here. I was not intending to review this film. I tend to lean into horror that has a guilt, grief, psychological, or a paranormal vibe to it. But I thought, like Margot, I would see this film so you don't have to, or at least not in the theaters. I can tell you that the film is unnerving to say the least. It is uncomfortable. The violence committed is not the only issue. The reaction to it by the character surrounding Margot is even more significant. Is that Goldhaber's fault? No, I don't think so. This film is just a reflection of who we are now, and that is not pleasant. Dacre Montgomery's portrayal is somewhat uneven. As I watched Dacre portray his twisted character, I wasn't even sure who or what he is. There are parts of his character that remind me of Heath Ledger's Joker, the way he talked and his walking gait. One hand, he seems to portray a veteran with PTSD. His combat skills are there to see, but his innocent act seems unconvincing. His psychotic personality did seem more on, but maybe over the top. He left me dead. I didn't hate him, or did I sympathize with him. Whereas Barbie Ferreira's acting was more convincing. Her portrayal of a person who not only carries baggage and guilt, but a somewhat genuine desire to make up for her sins by cleaning up the internet. Folly at best, fatal at worst. The other characters were more cliché than anything. Not likable, but in many ways a reflection of who society has become. As I said, this film was uncomfortable and unnerving. However, at the end, there was something that, depending on how you want to see it, is either a good thing or takes you completely out of the moment. I'm talking about blood. There is blood everywhere in this film. However, it isn't until the end where we start seeing it as it truly is. Fake, yes, I know. It is fake blood, but it's too watery, too bright, and didn't flow properly, or at least maybe not in the way that cinema conditioned us to see the essence of life. On one hand, I was a bit relieved. On the other hand, it looked bad. I am a 2 on this film. I see the point of this endeavor. I think the cast and crew made a valiant attempt to put together a social commentary. However, I didn't really think it landed. Even for a mindless slasher-style horror film, it did nothing to advance the genre or was good for your soul. It's a dark, uncomfortable horror film that cares as much about what we watch and why we watch it as it does about blood and body count. Whether it works for you is going to depend on your tolerance for grim, grounded violence and how interested you are in a story about content moderation, viral death clips, and audience complicity. That's my Faces of Death ending explained, from the Margot's Nightmare Job to the final showdown, and what it all says about online violence and the people who watch it. So, once you've seen the movie, let me know in the comments, did the ending work for you, and do you think it goes too far or just far enough? If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe for more horror deep dives, and check out the merch linked below if you want to support the channel. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.